May is going to be talking to us about engaging digital learners this afternoon. And she, as you all know, works with our e-learning team and probably has some direct experience with that. Just by way of interest, I came to know May a little bit when she was in our Ed Specialist program in the Ed Leadership program a few years ago in a class that I was teaching. Just an outstanding individual. So I'm really encouraged that she's our guest speaker today in this webinar. And the committee is excited to hear what you have to share with us this afternoon. And of course, for those of you who will be watching this or online, don't forget that we will record this and we'll make it available to everyone who couldn't make it. So spread the word. We had May in our midst this afternoon talking about engaging digital learners, and there's probably something that others can learn from what she's got to say. So thanks, May, for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it, Rick. I will go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Right, let me just look for my notes. Here they are. All right. So thank you for your introduction again, Rick. My webinar today is actually called Engaging a Digital Generation, but I don't mind at all that you called it Engaging Digital Learners, Rick, because that was one of the names that came up while I was trying to decide. And I stuck to this concept of engaging a digital generation for right now because it actually connects to another webinar that I started a long time ago with the e-learning team as a GA. And that one was titled Engaging Millennial Learners. And this is almost like a part two. It's an update. There's even some debunking of things that I helped propagate during that webinar itself, and just kind of a refresh to the concepts that I covered there. And I wanted to just give an honorable mention shout out to Justin. He's helped me a lot with just adapting this webinar over the years. He's kept it up, and it was great to come back and be able to keep working on it and update it. So a quick agenda on the topics that I want us to cover. I also wanted to mention that I'm hoping that we will take the opportunity to use this session as an ongoing discussion. I actually have a lot of questions built into it. I recognize that some of us here are teachers, some of us are instructional designers, some of us are admin and support. So we're all going to have slightly different perspectives when it comes to our students and the kind of responsibilities we have towards them or the engagement that we have with them in a classroom. So feel free to speak to your perspective as a student or your perspective as an adult learner, as someone who might be going through your own learning journey and interacting with different bits and pieces on the internet or wherever it is that you might be learning. So sharing your experience and your outlook will help our session, definitely. So one of the first things I wanted to cover was perspectives on digital generation, or digital generations in general. Like what makes one generation more digital or tech savvy than another? What are these generational divides? What makes someone part of a generation, as well as digging into this concept of changing demographics. What do we mean when we say something like that? And how can that be helpful for us as instructors? How can we reword it into something that could be more helpful? And then looking at perspectives from critical pedagogy as well to inform these ideas that I'm sharing with you today. Next, I would want us to get into defining engagement in a distracting world. I have some helpful perspectives from a scholarly resource conference and that I went to earlier this semester, and the conference speakers, the keynote speakers book as well, and just information that he's shared. And then looking at some e-learning tools and other resources that we have available within the university, or just even looking at perspectives of from e-learning on how to further engage our students using ed tech tools. So first, jumping into this concept of changing demographics. The reason why I want to bust the generation myth is because, like I mentioned, I had a previous webinar that was called Engaging Millennial Learners. And by naming it that, I would propagate, and this was part of my webinar, this concept that you can identify or analyze an individual based on this generational marker, whether they are a baby boomer or a Gen Xer or a millennial. And now we have Gen Z and Gen Alpha. But what we're actually looking at, what the amount of research that has come out in the past 10 years, or even sooner, I think maybe the past 5 years, is all of these terms actually don't mean very much. So one of the only things they have in common is that they don't mean very much. Sorry. And then again, digging into this concept of what are changing demographics, how can we identify who our learner is when the statement changing demographics is not very helpful and doesn't actually tell us very much about the students who are going to be coming into our classrooms, and then teaching perspectives as well. So again, just looking at what it means to be an instructor from a critical perspective and how that then connects to the way that we help motivate our students and bring their attention to our class content or our coursework. Sorry, it's being a little touchy, so I'm just kind of jumping all over the place. So, who here has heard of any of these generational markers? This title of Gen X or Millennial or Gen Z? Yeah, I see a few hands. So, as we start to dig into these concepts, especially, sorry, let me just pull up this quote over here. What we do see our research really helping us find is, as we dig into this concept of generational markers and we look at these age defining groups, all we're doing is creating a generalization, an overgeneralization that in fact lacks scientific rigor, and it does not take into account intersecting identities of our students. This can create harmful stereotypes. And one of the most harmful stereotypes that we've seen has actually led into us believing that our Gen Z students, or maybe our millennial students or Gen Alpha, students who were born after the advent of the internet, are somehow these digital natives, and they're somehow just digitally literate from the womb, right? When we know that that's not true, that's not possible. Age does not determine competency, and like all kinds of literacy, digital literacy skills need to be cultivated through education and training. So these claims that our millennial students or our Gen Z students are somehow just more in tune. They're just able to, be dropped in an online class and just simply know what to do, or they can just be dropped on any piece of technology or software and they'll just find their way around and excel at it, is not necessarily true. And that can be harmful because it ignores the persisting digital divide, excuse me, and can impact digital literacy that affects individuals of all ages. So based on just busting these two concepts, one, that our generational markers are really just telling us the time frame that an individual was born, and then our digital natives are not, in fact, digitally native. They are simply getting a lot more practice a lot sooner using different digital tools and devices. And then if we must think of our students as a group, if we do want to say we want to engage our millennial students, or we want to engage our Gen Z students, if we must group them up, let's think of them as a cohort group that is influenced by their environmental experiences and those factors. And this idea comes from humanizing pedagogy, which is a subset of critical pedagogy, which talks about looking at our students as a whole being. And I'll jump into this in our next slide. Um, any thoughts on what I've covered so far when it comes to the generational myths? Has anyone been, because I know I have been guilty of, thinking that millennials or Gen Z students are just digitally literate simply because because of when they were born. When that's not true. Has anyone fallen into that or actually felt like an outlier to that? Like, yes, I am a millennial or a Gen Z individual, but I actually am not that great with technology.
So I'll chime in, May, if you don't mind, because as I work with faculty members, especially on tools that they're using in the classroom, one of the things I typically will point to, and this is not a stereotype so much as it's just statistical information that we have from the state, that most K through 12 institutions now use Google. They use the Google platform, the Google Suite. So it's really a useful suite of tools to suggest or recommend that faculty use in their classroom, not only because Grand Valley issues those credentials, but also because they are often, I'm going to assert this, but they are often coming to us from Michigan schools that host these tools.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Gina.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm in the car picking up my daughter soon. So I am a faculty member at Grand Valley. What I feel in terms of students' digital literacy, there is a really broad spectrum. Some students are really doing good searching techniques and really good at like a tech savvy, but there are plenty of students who literally don't know how to run Excel or Microsoft. So sometimes it's been a little bit of a challenging to lecture those students using technology because they are so different.
Yeah.
Yeah, May, I just wanted to say, I think the reverse is true as well, that like, sometimes, and I'm in Gen X, so I'm identifying with that, because you're older, it's that you aren't as tech savvy or that you don't have the capacity for the technology because you weren't born in the digital, when all that stuff was around. And I think that's another thing we have to be cautious of is assuming that the older baby boomers and Gen Xers don't know what they're doing around technology.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Joshua.
I like your idea of pulling the stereotypes out and sort of just saying that this is just a way to categorize when someone was born. I'm an elder millennial, so I sort of border on Gen X and millennial, and so my personal experience kind of goes with what you're saying, that it sort of just depends. As far as tech savviness goes, it's not sort of a guaranteed thing based on generation. I have children who are Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and maybe what I would say about them and their friends is that they're very technologically adaptive. And what I mean is they can figure something out, how to make it do what they want it to do, but it doesn't mean they know the best way to do it or they're very good at it. My 5-year-old can handle an iPad, but he doesn't really know what he's doing. He knows how to get, Netflix open, but he wouldn't know how to change a password yet. And so I think you're sort of right. But what's interesting about these younger folks is that they are faced with technology all the time, so they are learning how to adapt to it. But yeah, like I said, they're not necessarily experts just because they can use something.
Yeah. Yep. I think you summed that up really well. It just to bring all of the different things that we talked about together, to start off with what Stephanie mentioned is we know for a fact that our K-12 schools are using Google with these students. A lot of times, at least very anecdotally, an instructor that teaches CIS 150 here in this in this university at Grand Valley has shared with me that this year was the first group of students that she had that were very adept at using Google Drive and Google Documents in general, but only specific parts of Google, so Google Documents mostly, Google Forms, and Google Classroom, and then really had no knowledge on how to use Google Sheets, weren't able to transfer any of the knowledge that they had in Google Docs to Word document. They weren't able to do certain things like find and replace, although those are features that are available in Google Document. But again, if we're not structuring the way that we're teaching them how to use the technology as well as that content, then they're really just going to use the technology as a means to access the content and interact with it. And they're not going to be necessarily learning these transferable skills of how to use this tool that they can then apply to Microsoft Word or Excel. And we are seeing this, especially with Microsoft products, that definitely there's a decrease in younger students knowing how to use it because we're just generally not using those tools. So it just brings us to, again, this circular concept of the way that these students learn how to use these tools and get more comfortable with them is simply by using them. It's exposure. So if they've been exposed to different tech tools at home for more often, they'll have a higher level of comfort with them. And whatever tools they're taught to use in school will be the tools that they know how to use. And even then, it really might not be a comprehensive use of the tool. It might just be a general knowledge, which would not be too different from an older peer. So then this brings us to this concept of teaching for every student, or for each student. So it can get very difficult. I know from an instructor perspective, when you have 20 students in the classroom minimum, you will not be able to necessarily get to know each and every single one of them at a personal level and be able to actually, bring in these concepts of being able to personalize and customize things for them. But I do believe there are some helpful perspectives in critical pedagogy that can allow us to look at our own teaching and our own practice that might be helpful in bringing that flexibility into the classroom. So the first point was students are whole persons, bringing with them previous experience, knowledge, bias, etc. So critical pedagogy, it really at its core teaches us that our students are not empty receptacles that we simply deposit knowledge into. They are these full individuals and whole beings. So one helpful way to look at your role with your students and seeing your students' role in the learning environment is seeing your students as these scouts heading towards or heading forward to forage and discover new terrain, and you as their home base. Or like a coach that provides them all the tools that they'll need to traverse the journey and a place to return to reset if something in that journey goes wrong. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? I'll just let us linger here for a minute. So then how does that bring us to learner analysis and identifying who our learner is? I was going to then turn that question to all of you. What is a helpful way to say that we have new groups of students in our classrooms? Kind of coming back to this idea that the statement changing demographics is a little vague and generally not helpful in telling us what has changed about our students. For you as instructors, what do you feel would be a more helpful way to convey these changes or these demographic changes that your students are experiencing or that you're experiencing with the student body? And I guess I can start it off with this question. Has anyone heard this kind of like not placeholder term, but like more general term that says changing demographics? You have heard that.
I think in K-12 we have heard that quite a bit, that demographics are changing and shifting. within school districts, whether that's economically that's changing or culturally it's shifting, shifting, you know, by race, but changing demographics, I do agree is it's okay, that's great, but what does that mean? Like specifically, let's drill down and find out what that means for your context of your situation.
Right. And how does that then, how does simply knowing that there are changing demographics actually help you improve your practice as an instructor? And there's a lot there to it. One of the main things that I put here is learner analysis. I'm sure the instructional designers in the room are familiar with this term. So identifying who your learner is crucial to connecting with them and engaging with them. And there are several instructional design methods that are really just focused on helping you run a learner analysis in the shortest amount of time possible so that you are able to do like a quick activity within your first week or your second week to help you get to know your students and get to know the specific things that you need to know from your students to know what you need to do within this individual class or with these specific students. And of course, it gets very difficult. So one of the reasons why I have this question up here is because I recognize that when we're talking to teachers and instructors, we're not talking about just one class of 20 students that they're going to get to know. It's often many, many classes, tens, if not hundreds of students. So how can you actually begin to make these kinds of decisions without creating an intense amount of work for yourself? And for me, I would say that information is usually found in the kind of information that we get before our students even enroll, or sorry, when they first enroll in the class before they even begin. So taking a look at your students, like within our College of Education, being able to see what their majors are. So seeing that content area and what it is that they might be focusing on will help you start to gauge your course towards things that might be more relevant to them. And then, of course, beginning to actually teach them and having this dynamic outlook to your course materials and activities as you get started in your course, that yes, these are rooted, like the one thing that should not shift or change in my course are my course objectives, but the materials themselves and the activities, those can be dynamic and those can be updated within reason, of course. So just kind of taking that flexible and dynamic approach of, I might need to shift this depending on my learners. And then this brings us to this concept of perspectives of attention and motivation. And this is from Teaching Distracted Minds. It's Dr. James M. Lang. He spoke at a conference at Grand Valley earlier this semester. And two of the biggest points that he talked about that I felt went really well with this concept of critical pedagogy, where you see your students as these whole beings, these scouts in a learning journey. And two of those points were, first, his concept or his explanation on the concept of goal pursuit versus attentional resource. And he talks about our cognitive control abilities that have not evolved to the same degree as our executive functions required for goal setting. So our cognitive control is really quite limited. We have a restricted ability to distribute, divide, and sustain attention. So really, he's here talking about concepts of how individuals are able to pursue goals and how to persist through that goal pursuit. And we do see that when it comes to things like making decisions, things like motivation, humans do have this fatigue built into it. So we can only make decisions for so long. We can only stay paying attention for so long. And so his response to that is for instructors to see themselves and see their course content as a steward of attention. So you're recognizing that your students are going through this learning experience. So because we know attention is precious, it's a limited resource, we will design learning experiences that are guiding our students through our course and bringing their attention to specific things where they can expend more of that attention energy in certain places and then be able to use less of it in other places. So being able to view your course from that perspective. Where do I want my students? Sorry, so, kind of asking yourself this question of where do I want my students to spend more time? Where can I expect them to skim? And that would be okay. And really getting yourself into that perspective from the student perspective and going through your course, looking at your own ability to pay attention. How long can you sustain attention going through one of your weekly modules? How long can you keep paying attention to even just one document or one reading that you've decided to assign to the students? And then from there on, making decisions of, okay, how can I enhance this activity? How can I add guides of attention within this activity that will help my students work through it? So really here, the conclusion I came to was our goal as instructors is to support or facilitate attention. Does anyone have any thoughts on that concept? I'm sure many of you have come across this concept of motivation and attention. Does anyone want to share any of those ideas? I won't pick on anyone, although.
I'll jump in, May.
Okay, sure.
So I think most of us are pretty familiar with the concept of like active reading. So I think as we're talking about, engaging students with the new technologies and thinking about ways we can create more interaction between students and technologies, because increasingly they're going to have to learn technologies more for their jobs or for their personal life. We really want to be intentional with selecting tools that are going to draw them in and make them a part of the learning, rather than, as you said, just treating them like an empty vessel that you can just fill them up with content. The students need to be authoring that content themselves inside of themselves. And the best way that they can do that is by involving them in the learning process in a way that encourages them to synthesize the content that you're presenting in their own words or in their own expressions. So I think one of the things that commonly comes up within our team is this idea of just kind of authenticating experiences through different modalities. So I think one way that could be facilitated a little bit better is to offer multiple modalities of expression for students for activities. So perhaps instead of using just a discussion board, maybe give students the option of doing a discussion board or a Flipgrid post, or have them create some kind of personal relic that includes some icons that help them to better express what they've learned, so that they're not just limited to the traditional, you need to write this post or you need to, give this presentation. So those are just my initial thoughts.
It's an excellent way to put it. Yeah, it sums it up perfectly. Having that dynamic outlook that can include knowing that you already have a list of accepted ways that students can submit. So you're not having to necessarily do a lot of changing and switching at the moment. You've already provided students with those instructions that say you can submit this as a written post in the discussion, you can submit this as a flip video, and kind of giving them more options from that perspective. Definitely. Yeah. And it all just connects really well, because then you are treating your students as these whole beings that have agency in their learning experience, and they're able to take more of that ownership on to themselves. And then also you're still being a steward to them and a guide to them in that learning experience, and helping guide their attention from one learning activity to the next.
I think I'll just add in one other point, because we are often working with adult learners or a group of learners that are transitioning from the pedagogy into the andragogy, is considering motivation And one of the most important pieces to consider when thinking about motivation for adult learners is relevance. And so creating opportunities for students that allow them to create a relic that is directly aligned with maybe their goals or their aspirations, or helping them reach those goals or aspirations, is gonna help them to better fine tune the learning in a way that's meaningful for them, rather than just hoping that they can pass a test or a quiz or check a box to demonstrate learning.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up because it actually like sends me back to my old version of this webinar when it was still focused on millennial learners. There was a resource that I had found that was called the 5 R's of like how to actually, was it five? It was a number of R's, and one of them, the most important one was relevancy, and it kept being brought up over and over again. And I think that concept is true and it persists within our students. And I think it might even be true for even younger students, because it's true in a lot of research, I see it attributed to adult learners mostly. But I really do think that this can be a powerful motivator for our younger students as well.
So May, in terms of
Yeah.
motivation, I think one other thing that example that Stephanie provided in terms of, giving them multiple modalities to express themselves. We know that adults, and I believe it's students in, K-12 as well, are motivated through autonomy. But I think it's especially towards adults, where if you give them some autonomy, some ability to make decisions about how it looks, sounds, and feels for them, that is motivating. So I like what Stephanie said, when I have those choices for expression, I'm thinking just even about myself, I'm more motivated about how I want to express my understanding than if I'm told that I have to do it this way and this is the only way. I know that
Yep.
puts a lot more pressure on instructors in terms of offering multiple modalities, but in terms of their learning and that transfer from short-term to long-term memory, it seems like that would be motivating to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one big motivator for instructors too would be just seeing that student achievement, get better and seeing their students achieve and be more engaged with the work than groups of students before. And I think that would be a motivator to keep going and keep exploring how you can improve your course from that perspective. And it is certainly a lot of setup, but it's not anything that you wouldn't be doing for your course anyways. So then one thing I wanted to transition to now is just kind of looking at our e-learning tools and resources, not just within Grand Valley. I did limit them to tools that we have at Grand Valley, but this can be extended to different tools if as long as it fits the general concept. So here I wanted to focus on multimedia tools. As we just talked about, multimedia tools will increase engagement with the subject matter. They combine text, images, different kinds of multimedia like animations and video and audio in your course content, and combining these different elements maximizes learner comprehension, which is something that we have also seen persist through younger learners and adult learners as well, is being able to engage with a topic in more than one format. For those of us who are familiar with universal design learning, we know that that has been consistent. So some of the tools that I wanted to just bring up, if any of you have used them before: Flip, Panopto, and Padlet. Has anyone tried any of these tools? Are there any other tools you've used and recommend for multimedia? I know I had Jamboard on here, but I removed it. Padlet does a very similar thing.
I'm gonna just kind of volunteer Rick Geisel. I know he's on the call right now, but I know Rick has used in the past for video. He's also used Loom, I believe. And one of the reasons I think he used it is because it was pretty relevant in the K-12 setting. So a lot of our students who work in K-12 were familiar with Loom. So I don't know, is that accurate, Rick?
Yeah, it is. And I liked the flexibility of being able to move that circle around in a slide deck, depending on the slide, and just overall aesthetics seem to be more engaging. So yeah, that's a good tool.
Yeah, I'll have to write that one down. It sounds familiar, but for some reason I'm just blanking on if I've actually seen it before.
I believe educators can sign up for a free account that gives them the ability to record longer videos than other free accounts.
Awesome. Right. And then this is less of e-learning tools and resources, more of like a format. So thinking about the different activities you can do given the different kind of format class that you can have. So for synchronous sessions versus asynchronous sessions, synchronous sessions will allow your students to ask questions live while being in the presentation while it's in progress. And then asynchronous sessions obviously will allow your students to have the time that they need to deliberate, reflect before asking questions, and just interact with your different course content differently. Has anyone here taught in either synchronous or asynchronous sessions? And have any of you noticed a difference in your student engagement and interaction in the different sessions? Yeah, go ahead, Rick.
Well, I've taught in the online synchronous sessions. And so I have used Hypothesis before and Zoom, and like Zoom, the chat rooms and stuff like that. So I mean, yeah, I do find that it's helpful to, rather than using like a whole group discussion that doesn't necessarily generate any engagement, or even if you, like, for instance, with Hypothesis, if they're engaging around an article or text with Hypothesis, and then you are using that annotation when you come back to a live session together as a whole group and analyzing the responses and the the things that people brought up as a way of kind of bringing it back to the whole group.
Yeah, that's a very good way of really, summing this entire slide up into one. Is your synchronous and your asynchronous interactions, even if they are separate, it doesn't mean that they can't connect, and that they don't just build on each other to ensure that your students are getting that additional engagement, that opportunity to keep engaging with the same content in a slightly different way. So, starting with Hypothesis, where usually they're reading independently, but what a lot of, and I've seen this concept, I should have grabbed a source of where I saw it, but this idea of like loneliness during reading, like this I don't remember if it was worded as like lonely reading, something like that, with when our students are in asynchronous sessions and they're completing a lot of the content online, they're often reading these very long articles and textbook chapters all on their own. So there's this isolation that happens within it that really isn't conducive to learning, especially that we know, something that Stephanie mentioned earlier that's very backed up by a lot of research, just kind of this concept of social constructivist learning, being able to say out loud the new ideas that you're learning, verbalizing them in your own words, hearing others discuss them in these novel ways and digest them and speak them back to you, really does help further that learning process. So being able to take students through an activity where maybe they read on Hypothesis first and they're adding comments and annotations, and then they're meeting with you synchronously, and you're once again kind of going through those Hypothesis notes and maybe asking students to elaborate or give additional information on what they meant when they left a certain annotation or a note.
And just to build off of that, I think it's also more inclusive for students who maybe struggle or are more conscientious in the classroom, who struggle to speak up, or might have a language barrier, and it takes them a little bit more time to adapt their thinking to English. And so maybe they might not be comfortable speaking up in class, but they would feel more comfortable making a post online. So I think that that lends itself to those students who maybe just need a little bit more time and space to present their ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, to build on Stephanie's comment there, it really kind of depends on what kind of learner you are. And I teach quite a bit of online asynchronous, and that is very conducive to a certain type of learner who's self-motivated, self-driven, and it has the added advantage of people being able to approach the learning when they're prepared to approach the learning, when they're in the right headspace to complete a task rather than a predetermined time. So there's advantages and disadvantages about, both these approaches. I think for me, I've worked hard over the years to try to chunk video lectures into smaller segments so as to keep people's attention. But I'd like to, in the future, grow in terms of being able to just have little call outs or timeouts in the middle of those videos where ask an engaging question, something that a student can respond to as they're moving their way through a video. And that's kind of where I'd like to take it next. I see that being done in different venues, and would like to do that with my students as well.
Yeah, and I think I could have added this too in our synchronous, asynchronous slide, or even this multimedia slide that we do. Panopto does do those quizzes, those built-in comprehension questions that you can add into the video where you can take a pause. And again, because in Ultra right now, we have this document. I don't know if you've been using documents in Ultra where you can add all of these different bits and pieces where you can start out with a little bit of text introduction and then your video, and then go into some questions that you want them to answer and consider, and then maybe there could be a hypothesis reading after that. You could really string along as long or as short as an activity, like chunks of an activity as you want in one area, and that's definitely a great way to go about putting content in one place for students.
Do you happen to know if we have a mechanism yet whereby a student answers a question in a Panopto video and somehow that answer goes to the grade book? Maybe it's not even graded, but there's evidence of having answered that question or a place to record the answer to that question?
Yes, I believe it should be, so long as you create that question and then have it associated with a grade. It doesn't have to be a grade that counts into their overall grade, but as long as you have like a points, it should Panopto. There's also a specific way to embed that video then from Panopto into your course, and that should then create the link between your course and the gradebook.
Thank you.
Or the video and your gradebook. We'll definitely. I haven't tried it, so we might need to look at it, but I know if Noah was still here, he would have no problem giving you that answer.
I might actually be able to chime in on this. So I don't know if it exactly answers the question, but yeah, like you said, like when you have that Panopto quiz embedded in your course and have any sort of associated grade value with it, when students take that, it should automatically update the grade book. But I actually did run into an issue about a month ago where a student did take the quiz. They got a 5 out of 5 at the end, and then when they went to the grade book, actually nothing was appearing in the grade book. But I was able to go into the back end of Panopto, and I was able to see that the student, I was able to see a time and date stamp of when the student took like the actual assessment and stuff like that. And actually ended up being something really weird that came down to the faculty member that I was working with that initially set up the quiz. They had, it was their first time using the Panopto quiz feature. So when they set it up, they had accidentally set up a quiz, 2 quizzes on the same video at the exact same timestamp of another. So Blackboard didn't like that, wasn't able to read it, but it was clear, I could see on Blackboard's progress tracking that the student had completed the assessment. I could go in the back end of Panopto and confirm that as well. But because there was 2 quizzes technically embedded into that video, which were the exact same number of questions, it just had to do with that timestamp. So that's kind of one of those weird instances that I've run into. But what May said, it also checks out, and I know Noah would confirm that as well if he was here as well. So
Yeah. Yep. So I think whenever you're ready to start implementing that, Rick, feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you, definitely.
Yep. And then I did have a slide on AI in teaching. We have talked about it plenty in this committee, so I don't think I need to repeat too much about it, but and Justin really did most of the facilitating for this slide. But 2 things that we agreed that I would share with you. So one of the things that I thought was very important is just to kind of bring up this concept that any attempts to be prescriptive about AI use in teaching and learning can be premature at best and dead wrong at last. So we do understand that AI can help both faculty and students in various ways, and that it's being examined by many organizations. We have a lot more information now than we did when I even wrote this statement, which that information would just like make me believe that yes, definitely, what was written here is correct. We need to wait before we really decide that it's all good or it's all bad. But I recognize that with so many of our students already being connected to AI tools and possibly using them in their work, instructors are going to want to start talking about what can be done. And I think that perspective, again, we've gone into this quite a bit already in the 2 Big Byte sessions that dealt with AI. But I think that instructors will need to really, I'm forgetting the word that I want to use, but essentially consulting with your program, first and foremost, any kind of specific overarching policies that we might have to stay within when it comes to Grand Valley specifically. And then after that, asking yourself, considering what is potentially the important role that AI could play in your students' professional future. Is there some connection between the role that you're training them for now or the knowledge that you're teaching them now? Because I do have to be careful to not kind of look at education as just a means to an end for students, where it's just, oh, they're just going through this knowledge just so that they can get a job, when we know that that's not true. And education is a lot more than that for our students. So, being able to kind of ask yourself, would this tool be worthwhile for them to learn for their professional future, whatever role it is that they might move into? And then one question to consider, what does ethical AI use look like to you? And are we preparing, those are 2 questions, and are we preparing students to use AI in their professional fields and work? And I think just from the talks that we've had in the past, everyone has a pretty measured perspective towards how they are approaching AI, at least within this group specifically. But I am curious to hear from you, Rick, or Rick, what some of your perspectives have been on AI and any of your experiences, and any of the other instructors who are there in person. Sorry, Rick.
No, you're fine. That's totally fine. Naoki is also here in the room with me, so I'm not sure if he has a response to that, but yeah, you're referencing our Big Byte from last month. I know that Matt Roberts, who's got his coffee emoji there in his in his screen, he did an ethical look at AI, and again, like you referenced, the month before that, Justin talked about what it is and So for us in EDL in our Ed Leadership Program, I think we're just on the cusp of even thinking about, you know, where does AI fit into our work as instructors? And I would agree we're at a pretty measured approach at this point in terms of trying to figure out the entry points and the use of it in our program. Like Rick, you're in the program too. I mean, is there anything that you'd want to say more about that?
Yeah, I had my first student presentation on legal issues in AI this semester, so it's starting to percolate from students, and that was kind of interesting to see. But from an academic honesty perspective, from that side of the table, I haven't had to deal with it much, partly because my assessments are so scenario based with unique fact patterns, and the requirements are such that they have to use certain sources to be able to document their responses, that so far I haven't detected that AI is a tool that would even allow a student that it would be necessarily helpful just because of the way the assessments are tailored. I'm not saying I'm going to be so naive to say it's never going to come up, but I think sometimes the way that we structure an assessment either really opens that funnel wide for something like a student to use AI, and sometimes we can narrow that quite a bit just by the way we frame something. So yeah, from an academic honesty perspective, I honestly just haven't had to deal with it much yet.
Yeah, that does bring us to what Matt said in the last session, where I think why there's this moment of panic, or at least this is how I interpret it and took that concept away, is we've been using writing, like just solely writing, as a way of evaluating student learning for many things. And now AI can do that. It can write, and it can string together, logical concepts, and now we're having to kind of go back and say, how can we structure an assignment in a way where we're still seeing student learning without necessarily relying solely on writing?
Yeah.
Let me see. I'm going to make sure I'm not missing anything from this slide. There was one more thing that Justin wanted me to cover, and I don't want to miss it for this slide. The importance of being curious and getting your hands on it. So for you as an instructor to really kind of understand what your students might be doing with AI, it would be helpful for you to jump in, maybe create a fake email that you're never going to log into again, that isn't connected to any of your credentials or personal information, and then create an account on one of the many AI services and just kind of take a look, maybe run some of your assignments through it, some concepts, and see, how does this do?
Yeah, May, I think can you go back for just a second?
Yeah.
One thing I think that we talked about earlier that's specifically related to this slide in our discussion around AI is it makes me think about, while I haven't incorporated that fully, and I agree with Rick, I'm trying to create authentic assessments that really make it difficult to use that. But then I go back to, but what you have on the slide is, the relevance again, as Stephanie talked about earlier, the relevance of our students' professional futures. What are they going to be doing? At some point, it's going to be, like, I think Matt mentioned this last week, the hype cycle right now, that notion of we're in a hype cycle with AI, and AI right now is way up here, and everybody's like, this is going to be everywhere. It's going to do everything. It's never going to go away. Everybody's going to be using it, and at some point, it's going to drop down, and we're gonna go down in the hype cycle, and we're gonna start to realize there's some specificity where AI can come into play, and that'll be helpful to us as instructors. But I also think like we can't put our heads in the sand and just pretend that we can wait until all that plays out. Like there are students, for many of us who have graduate students who are working in professional roles, this is part of their work. I'm not sure to the extent yet. So how do we as instructors continue to keep ourselves relevant in the way we're using or maybe not using AI in our courses?
Yeah. And if we're addressing or maybe not addressing, because sometimes it really is just as simple as addressing AI and saying, we know this tool exists, we know what individuals can do with it. Maybe here are some famous or maybe infamous case studies from the media on how, you know, someone in your exact professional role was maybe caught using it or admitted to using it, maybe provided a helpful case study on how they used it. You know, it can be a range, anything from like a successful experience to maybe a failed experience that students can look at and evaluate, and I think really get some use out of.
Yeah.
And then this is, let me just confirm that this is the final slide. Yep. So just looking at e-learning tools and resources again, our analytics and data option that's in Blackboard. This is new to Blackboard. In the classic version, we didn't quite have this dedicated tab. We used to have to dig deep under specific items that we would build in our courses. Now, progress tracking is on automatically in all courses, in all of the Ultra courses that are created for each semester. So any time within like a week, maybe even less than a week of your class going live, when you click into that analytics tab, you will begin to see some helpful data, information on if your students have logged in yet, information on how long they've spent in the course, as well as the different parts of the course that they've gone to, and you know how long they spent, how much time they spent in there before they progressed to the next item. So it can be helpful to capture all of that. It'll definitely help with the different decisions that you make within your course. And then our communication toolkits that are already in our courses as well. I believe, I'm not entirely sure that the mental health communication toolkit is in there. I'll have to double check, but I know that the message manager has been in there since the fall. And this is really just geared towards first or instructors that are teaching first year students. Hold on, I believe it was first year instructors that are teaching first year students. So new instructors, new students. And so the message manager is built together as a resource for them to quickly be able to find different cases that they might need to address their students for. So for example, some of them are missing assignments, like either the first missing assignment or like several missing assignments, as well as helpful links to navigate where you can submit an alert to your student's advisor if that's necessary. And then the mental health communication toolkit is put together. I actually put that link in so that we can jump into it, put together by University Counseling Center. And it does just provide a ton of helpful information on what you can share with your students. So there's communication materials, graphics, video clips, just an array of resources that you can use to help your students with just being mindful of their own mental health, and kind of you as an instructor also being mindful as that. Again, just to tie into this concept of, you know, humanizing pedagogy and critical pedagogy, where we're looking at our students as whole individuals. And that is about it for my presentation. I went a little bit over time. I apologize, but.
May, do you think we should do a plug for the Digital Creator Lab?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's do that. Let me go ahead and pull that website up. I think Justin would appreciate that. So you should all be able to see my screen now. As part of the Knowledge Market, there is a digital creator lab that students can go to work with a digital skills consultant at helping them complete different digital projects or learn basic computer skills, determine different mediums for their digital communications, navigate technologies for media production. So they can make an appointment and go. And then they also have webinars and training sessions that are open for everyone. So not just students, anyone can be a part of them. Is there a list of those? So there isn't a list for the winter ones yet, but there is all of the different things that you can do within the Digital Creator Lab, like podcasting booths for students, audio and video equipment, and other software and technology.
Great. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, May.
Absolutely.
So, May, thank you again for being here, sharing your insights, and lots to think about. Hopefully, I'm sure that we're going to have some people who will be watching us after the fact. And certainly we'll make sure that in our announcements and sharing out the recording that they can reach out to our friends in e-learning to support those of us who have more questions. And I'm intrigued with Rick's question around, you know, the quizzes within Panopto. I know that's been a topic before, but again, I think that's something that maybe other people are looking to in terms of engaging our digital generation. Notice I changed that, May. I changed that from learn to generation. So
I noticed that.
So,
and if I can add one more plug, my webinar is just one very general beginning to these topics and these concepts. And my the rest of my colleagues, the e-learning team, they are very well versed in all of these concepts and have very dedicated webinars that they run. So we have some community of inquiry webinars coming up in the next semester. We have all of these specific video assessment types, media assessment types webinars. So just if any of what you found that I talked about you found interesting, please feel free to check out those webinars as well.
Yeah, May, just to make a plug for that, our GA, Pooja Gadagay, gets information from one of the e-learning teams. It might be you, May. And we put that in the Chechi newsletter. So all of that information we're putting into the Chechi newsletter along with the Chechi Tech News, the webinars. So please make sure you pass along to your colleagues that the Chechi newsletter is another avenue to pick up on where you can find these resources that e-learning and others are offering to support you with the pieces that you're trying to incorporate in your instruction in your courses. All right, with that, thank you again, and I hope everybody, we're signing off. We're not going to be back till January, so we're signing off, and we're saying we hope everyone has a great holiday season, and we appreciate you being here this afternoon.